Ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
Now wait a minute. I don't know what you came to do, but I came to celebrate the life and legacy of a great American, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
All right.
So I know you can do better than that, so let's try again. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so very much, and I really need to thank Sergeant Anderson for that kind introduction I so richly deserve and so seldom get. Give her a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your warm welcome, but somehow I feel I need to be applauding each of you and thank you for all that you do to keep our nation secure and peace. Thank each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart for your service to America. To give the Army a big hoo-ah. As you know, next Monday, January 17, will mark the 25th anniversary of the legal holiday honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a grandson of a former slave, who rose to spiritual heights attained by few mortals and therefore fulfill that old biblical adage, he who is last shall be first. And so this holiday season is a time for Americans of goodwill to reflect upon how far we have come out of that dark swamp of bigotry and how far we still must travel to reach Dr. King's sunlit path of racial justice. Mrs. King said this holiday must not be celebrated simply as an African-American holiday. It must not be celebrated by going out and shopping. She has great difficulty with the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. white sale. You ought to get that one on the way home. She said it has to be. Hurry up now, Colonel, I got to keep on moving. But it's a holiday for all Americans because Dr. King gave his life that all might be free. He said we can live together as brothers or sisters or perish together as fools. And for the most part, ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to teach about Dr. King. But I hope you don't mind if I preach just a little bit. Because you can't have an understanding of this 20th century prophet apart from the legacy that he inherited as a regularly ordained African-American Baptist preacher. In fact, he comes from a long lineage. His great-grandfather, grandfather, and father were Baptist preachers. And Dr. King was one of the greatest preachers of his era, and his life was his greatest sermon. Let me repeat that. His life was his greatest sermon. And today I'm going to use a few statistics to punctuate my points about the contributions of Dr. King. And I'm reminded of the story of a young preacher who came to the podium and to preach his inaugural sermon. And he said, and they took 5,000 loaves of bread, 2,000 fish, to feed a multitude of 5 people. It was a miracle. And an old parishioner sitting on the front row said loud enough for the preacher to hear him, "That wasn't a miracle, I could do that." The preacher returned to his study and discovered his mistake and decided to teach the same sermon the next Sunday. He came to the podium and he said, and they took 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish, to refeed a multitude of 5,000 people. It was a miracle. And Colonel McHugh, he looked that old parishioner in the face and he said, "I guess you can do that too." And the old man said, "Of course I could. I would feed them all the food that you had left over from last Sunday." So if I don't have my number is absolutely 100% correct, I hope you will be just a little bit more forgiving. In her wonderful poem entitled Martin Luther King Jr., the illustrious African-American poet Gwendolyn Brooks wrote, A man went forth with gifts. He was a prose poem. He was a tragic grace. He was warm music. He tried to heal the vivid volcanoes. His ashes are reaching the world. His dream still wishes to anoint the barricades of faith and of control. His world still burns at the center of the sun above the thousands and the hundreds of thousands. The word was justice. It was spoken, so it shall be spoken, so it shall be done. A man named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. went forth with gifts. And one of his greatest gifts was his impatience with the denial of freedom and justice to his people. And from his interpretation of our Constitution, coupled with his faith, he drew the strength and the courage to be a drum major for freedom, justice, peace, and equality. He simply asked all Americans to be true to the ideas that best represented our country, and a better country stands in place today because of his efforts. And friends, a man named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. went forth with gifts. He had the wonderful gift of genius, an extraordinary commitment to education and to excellence. He completed high school by a special exam at the age of 15. He was an ordained minister at the age of 18. He earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology from Morehouse College at the age of 19. A BA in divinity degree from Crozet Theological Seminary at 21. And a PhD in systematic theology from Boston University at 26. He was the youngest man in history to win the Nobel Peace Prize at 35. Time Magazine Man of the Year at age 35. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Husband, father, teacher, preacher, emancipator, child of God, a superior role model for all Americans and specifically for our young people. And my friends, Dr. King was also a student of history. He knew that just like the Sankofa bird of Africa, we must revisit our past to determine our destiny and to chart our future. Dr. King knew that African Americans have always been a part of the never-ending American struggle to excel, to find a place in the sun, to be a part of the whole, all the time having to deal with a heritage rooted deeply in slavery. Dr. King said, yes, I was a slave to my foreparents. I'm not ashamed of that, but I am ashamed of the people who were so evil as to make me a slave. Just as Jewish Americans ensure that Americans remember the Holocaust, African Americans must ensure that America remembers slavery and vow never again, never again. And he read about the nonviolent movement led by Gandhi in India. It impressed him very, very deeply. And so he fused Gandhi's nonviolent tactics with religious principles of unconditional love, truth, and forgiveness, even for one's adversaries. Man must evolve for all human conflicts, a method that rejects revenge and aggression and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love, Dr. King said. And so he organized hundreds of nonviolent boycotts, rallies, and marches in the struggle for civil rights and human rights. And friends, as a result, his house was bombed with him and his family in it. He was stabbed nearly to death. He faced death and injury before angry and howling mobs, fire hoses, and police dogs. He was imprisoned some 30 times. He was often beaten and maligned. And between blows, he must have wondered, as that great African-American poet Langston Hughes, I swear to the Lord I still can't see why democracy means everybody but me. But he never stopped preaching or teaching nonviolence as a more excellent way